Nobody touches 6-2 until I've signed it. That aircraft is mine until it flies. Master Sergeant Kurt Brumley said it the way he said most things, with the flat certainty of a man who had earned the right to be certain. He stood at the center of the hangar floor with a coffee in one hand and a torque wrench in the other. 44 years old, 26 of them spent with his hands inside attack helicopters, and around him the morning maintenance meeting broke and scattered to work. The hangar was the size of a church and colder. 2 AH-64 Apaches sat nose to nose under the lights, canopies open, panels off, the guts of them showing. The wiring looms, the hydraulic runs, the long articulated spine of the tail boom leading back to the tail rotor gearbox. The floor smelled of hydraulic fluid and cold metal, and the particular ozone smell of a place where high-voltage test sets are always plugged in somewhere. Through the open hangar doors, the airfield lay flat and bright under a hard blue sky, and out on the pad, a third Apache sat, turning, blades ticking over, waiting for its crew. This is the kind of place that runs on trust, and the trust runs downhill from one man. On a good maintenance floor, that man is the reason the aircraft are safe. Brumley was, by any measure anyone at that airfield would give you, a good maintenance floor's good man. He knew every rivet on every bird. He had never lost an aircraft to a fault he had signed off. He had also, over 26 years, learned to believe that the airfield was safe because he made it safe, and that anyone who arrived to tell him something about his aircraft was, until proven otherwise, a nuisance to be managed. Both of those beliefs were about to be tested by a woman in civilian clothes, and only one of them was going to survive the morning. An Apache is not a forgiving machine, and the people who keep it flying know it in their hands. It is 4 tons of articulated violence held together by torque values and hydraulic pressure, and the discipline of the men and women who signed for it. And the tail rotor, that small vertical rotor at the very back, the one that keeps the whole aircraft from spinning under the torque of the main rotor, is the part that forgives least of all. Lose it, and you do not have a helicopter anymore. You have a machine trying very hard to become a top. Everyone on that floor knew it. It was the reason Brumley's certainty was worth something. He had kept a lot of tail rotors honest over 26 years. It was also the reason his certainty was worth watching, because the tail rotor does not care how many times a man has been right before. She had come in through the personnel door 20 minutes earlier, and no one had paid her much attention. Middle of her 5th decade, dark hair going gray at the temples pulled back plain, gray slacks, a soft shell jacket with no markings, and a visitor lanyard, of the kind the front gate hands to manufacturers, representatives, and auditors, and anyone else who has a reason to be on the flight line, and no uniform to explain it. She carried a tablet and nothing else. The crews took one look and filed her, without thinking about it, under tech rep, some field service person from the manufacturer, come to talk about a modification or a supply issue. Harmless, ignorable, not to be given an aircraft to touch. She let them file her there. It was, in fact, exactly where she wanted to be filed. She walked the line slowly. She was not in a hurry about anything, and that was the first thing that a certain kind of person would have noticed, if a certain kind of person had been watching. The economy of her, the way she moved without waste, the way her eyes went to the aircraft and the status placards and the open panels, and almost never to the faces. She stopped at the tail boom of 6-2, the aircraft Brumley had claimed as his own, and she laid one hand flat against the cool skin of the boom, palm open, fingers spread, the way you lay a hand on the flank of a horse, and she read the servo placard and the maintenance data on her tablet and the small weep of fluid at a fitting, and she went still. "Your number 2 tail rotor servo is reading past the limit," she said. She did not raise her voice, and she said it to the aircraft as much as to anyone. And the torque on the aft servo mount is under spec. I'd pull the servo before this bird flies. A young specialist near the boom, Bree Kovac, 22, elbow deep in a panel 2 aircraft down, looked up. A young warrant officer in a flight suit crossing the floor with a helmet bag, Chief Warrant Officer 2, Aaron Petrosky, 28, slowed his stride without deciding to. And Master Sergeant Kurt Brumley, who owned this floor and everything on it, turned around with his coffee and his wrench and looked at the woman with the lanyard telling him about his own tail rotor, and something in him that was more habit than malice decided the morning needed correcting. "The manufacturer," he said, loud enough to carry, warm enough to invite the floor in, "sends us a lady with a lanyard to tell me about my own tail rotor." A couple of the crew smiled, because the boss was smiling. "Ma'am, I have had my hands inside this aircraft since before you read the brochure. That servo is within tolerance. It's on the sheet. You want to help? There's coffee in the break room and a chair with your name on it." It was not cruel, exactly. He did not touch her, did not curse her, did not tower over her. It was worse in a quieter way. It was a man so certain of his own floor that he could not conceive of the person in front of him being anyone he needed to hear, and he made that certainty public, because on his floor, the public agreeing with him was how the floor stayed his. The crew went back to work with the small warmth of people whose boss has just handled a nuisance. The woman with the lanyard did not argue. She lifted her hand off the tail boom, looked once more at the fluid weeping at the fitting, and stepped back. But she stood there a beat longer than a dismissed person stands, her eyes on the servo, and if anyone had been reading her instead of laughing with the master sergeant, they would have seen that she was not embarrassed and she was not angry. She was calculating. She had read weather like this before. She did not leave, and she did not go find the coffee and the chair with her name on it. She moved down the line to the next bird and read it too, and then she came back to 6-2, and this time when she spoke, she said something specific enough that it stopped Kovac's hands. "When that servo goes," she said quietly, "to no one and to everyone, it won't fail soft. You'll get feedback in the pedals first, a nibble, then a buzz, and if the crew treats it like a rigging issue and keeps flying, it'll go hard over. Full deflection, no warning, and then the aircraft is trying to spin, and the pilot is trying to talk it out of it. The limit on that placard is 0.8. You're reading 1.1. That's not within tolerance. That's the early signature." She said the numbers the way other people say their own phone number, without reaching for them, and she named the failure sequence in order. Feedback, then buzz, then hard over, like a woman reading a story she had read many times. Kovac, 22 years old, and 8 months on the floor, felt the hair go up on her arms, because that was not how a tech rep talked. That was how the standardization instructors talked in the emergency procedures classes, the ones who made you recite the tail rotor failure steps until you could say them in your sleep. Petrosky had stopped altogether. He set his helmet bag down on a workbench and watched the woman with the lanyard the way you watch something you are trying to place. He had flown Apaches for 6 years. He had sat through the tail rotor emergency procedures brief a dozen times, and it had been drilled into him by instructors who all, every one of them, were reciting the same 10 calm lines out of the same fleet publication, and the woman in the gray slacks had just said 3 of those lines, almost word for word, without a book, standing on a hangar floor in civilian clothes. Kovac put a gauge on the servo. Then she put a torque wrench on the aft mount. Then she stood up slowly and looked at the numbers on the sheet and looked at the woman with the lanyard. And she said, because she was young enough to still say true things out loud, It's 1.1, Master Sergeant, and the mount's under spec. She's right. Brumley did not even turn around. It's been 1.1 for 2 flights, Kovac. It's monitored. Log it and move on. He was not lying, and he did not think of himself as cutting a corner. He had seen 100 servos read a hair high and fly for months. That was the thing about a man who is right 99 times. He stops being able to hear the 100th time coming. The woman with the lanyard wrote nothing down and said nothing more. She only stood at the tail of 6-2 with her flat hand, back on the boom, feeling the small, cold weep of the fitting under her fingers. And out on the pad, the third Apache ran its blades up and lifted off into the hard blue sky, and she watched it go with the stillness of someone reading the weather and not liking it. Petrovsky, quietly to himself, thought, I trained on a procedure written by someone who talks exactly like that. He tried to shake it off and could not. He had been a brand new pilot once, sweating through the emergency procedures phase, made to recite the tail rotor failure steps over and over until the instructor was satisfied he could say them with his eyes closed and his hands shaking. And the instructor had told the class something Petrovsky had never forgotten. He had said, the person who wrote these 10 lines wasn't sitting at a desk imagining a hard-over. She'd had one. Everything in here is written by somebody who lived through the exact 4 minutes you're training for, and if you ever meet her, you shut up and you listen, because she paid for every word. Petrovsky had thought of that author in the abstract way you think of the people who write the manuals as a name he would never meet. He looked at the woman with the lanyard laying a flat hand on the tail boom of 6-2, and the abstract thing began, very quietly, to become a specific thing. He did not say anything. The old warrant's voice was not in his ear yet. That call was still an hour away. But he moved his helmet bag off the workbench, and he did not go back to the flight planning room, and he found small reasons to stay on the floor, because some instinct older than his rank had told him that the most important thing he could do that morning was stay close and stay standing. By mid-morning, the hangar had folded the woman with the lanyard into its weather, the way a room folds in anyone the boss has dismissed. It was not cruelty, and it was not a campaign. It was simpler, and, in its way, more dangerous than cruelty. A room full of good people deferring, as they had learned to defer, to the one man whose certainty ran the floor. The tech rep became a small joke that cost no one anything, a nod, a half smile, a wide berth. She had said the servo was bad. The master sergeant had said it was fine. The master sergeant was always right. Therefore, the servo was fine, and the tech rep was a nuisance, and the whole chain of reasoning felt like common sense, because it usually was. She did not fight it. She sat on a stool at the edge of the floor with her tablet, and, to anyone glancing over, she was a rep doing rep things, thumbing through screens. She was not. She was pulling the maintenance history on 6-2's number 2 servo and laying the readings out in a line. 0.6, 0.7, 0.9, 1.1, and watching the line bend the wrong way, the way a line bends when a part is not drifting, but dying. She photographed the trend. She photographed the torque log on the aft mount, under spec on the last 3 sign-offs, always by the same confident hand. She was not building a grievance. She had no interest in a grievance. She was building the one thing that survives an argument with a certain man, a record. Kovac drifted over on a pretext, a gauge to return to a drawer that happened to be near the stool, and she said, "Low?" not looking up. "I'd have pulled it too, ma'am, for what it's worth. I don't have the say. But I'd have pulled it." "You have more say than you think," the woman said. "You said it out loud on the floor. That's the say that matters. Keep saying it." "He's not wrong that much," Kovac said. "And there was loyalty in it. And confusion, too. A young Marine's version of a young soldier's problem. How do you square that the person you've been taught is always right might be wrong about the one thing that counts today? He's the best we've got. Everybody says so. I've seen him catch stuff nobody else would catch. He probably is the best you've got, the woman agreed. And she said it without any edge, because she meant it. That's not the problem. The best people are the ones who've been right so long they've forgotten what being wrong feels like. Being wrong is a skill, same as being right. You keep it sharp by listening to the gauge instead of your own record. She looked at the trend line on her tablet, then at Kovac. He read the torque discrepancy on that aft mount when nobody else did. That's a good man's instinct still working. He just filed it under nothing because his record told him to. Your job, and it's a hard one at 22, is to be the person on the floor who trusts the gauge, even when the best man in the building tells you the gauge is lying. Kovac took that with her, and it settled somewhere it would stay. She went back to her panel. It was a small thing, and it had cost her something, contradicting the master sergeant in his own hangar, and both of them knew it. You have probably been in a room like this, not a room where anyone is a villain, a room where everyone is decent and busy and certain, and the one quiet voice saying, "Wait, check that again," gets folded into the weather, because checking again is slower, and the boss is usually right. If a story about the quiet voice that turns out to be the one that matters is a story you want to see all the way through, take a second and subscribe, because in about 10 minutes, the airfield is going to find out exactly whose voice it just spent the morning ignoring. On her tablet, the trend line bent the wrong way, and she looked at it for a long moment. And then she looked out the hangar doors at the empty blue sky where the Apache had gone, and she did the arithmetic she had spent 17 years hoping never to do again. The system did the rest, without malice, the way a system does. Brumley signed 6-2 up. He wrote with intolerance, monitor in the discrepancy block, initialed it in the confident hand the woman had already photographed 3 versions of, and the aircraft went onto the flight schedule for the afternoon. The paper said the servo was fine. In a hangar, the paper is the truth, until something louder proves it wrong. And nothing had proven it wrong, because the only person who had tried to prove it wrong was a tech rep with a lanyard, and no authority anyone recognized. The woman read the signed sheet over Kovac's shoulder without appearing to, and she spoke once more, to Brumley's back, level and specific. With intolerance isn't a number, Master Sergeant. It's a trend. 0.6 to 1.1 across 4 flights is not a servo that's high. It's a servo that's failing. That trend crosses the limit on the next start, not the one after. She laid one flat hand on the workbench beside the sheet, palm down, as if setting the trend there for the room to see. You can sign it up, but you're not signing that it's within tolerance. You're signing that you'll accept the hard-over if it comes. For half a second the floor was quiet, because that was a hard sentence, and it had landed square. Then Brumley shook his head, and the shake was almost kind, the head shake of a veteran at a novice who has read one too many manuals. Appreciate the passion, ma'am. Truly. 6-2 flies at 1400. And he went back to his work, because he had a schedule to make, and an aircraft to turn, and no room in his morning for a tech rep's trend line. She was not angry when he said it. That was the thing Kovac noticed, watching from her panel. The tech rep did not flush, did not argue, did not do any of the things a person does when their pride has been stepped on in public for the second time in a morning. She simply filed it, the way she filed everything, and Kovac understood, dimly, that she was watching someone who had stopped caring about being believed and started caring only about the aircraft. There is a kind of person who will let you think they are a fool all day long if it means the machine gets fixed, and that person is very rare and very dangerous to underestimate. And Kovac was 22 and did not have the words for it yet, but she could feel it standing 3 feet away. The schedule stood. Another aircraft launched first, a bird from the far end of the line, its crew already strapping in. A young pilot named Sloan, though the woman with the lanyard did not know his name yet, and it ran up on the pad and lifted into the blue while 6-2 waited its turn. The woman watched the launched Apache climb out and turn toward the training area, and the countdown in that hangar stopped being a number on a schedule and became, without anyone knowing it yet, an aircraft in the air. Petrosky went and did the thing that would matter, though he could not have told you why he did it. He went into the flight planning room, and he pulled the controlling fleet publication for tail rotor emergencies, the 10-line procedure every Apache crew in the Army trains on, the one he could recite from memory, the one that had been drilled into him so hard he could feel the rhythm of it in his chest, and he scrolled to the front matter to find the name of the officer who had authored it. The authoring line was protected. A gray bar where a name should be, the way names are protected when the person who earned the byline would rather the procedure did the talking and the name stayed off it. But he read the opening paragraph again, slowly, and the paragraph had a cadence he knew. A plain, hard economy, one instruction per line, no word that did not carry weight. And he heard it in the voice of the woman on the hangar floor saying feedback, then buzz, then hard over, and he felt the two things line up like a sight picture. He called a senior standardization pilot he trusted, an old warrant officer at the schoolhouse, and he described the woman without naming her because he had no name to give. The way she read the aircraft, the failure sequence she recited without a book, the numbers to the decimal, the stillness of her when the master sergeant called her a lady with a lanyard. The old warrant was quiet on the line for a while, long enough that Petrosky checked the screen. "Aaron," he said finally, "if she's who you're starting to think she is, get out of her way and let her work. Don't announce her. Don't defend her. Just make sure that when she moves, nobody's standing in front of her." A breath. "And son, if that servo's really reading 1.1 and she called a hard over, you get that aircraft on the schedule looked at before it flies. Because if she's who I think she is, she's the last person on this earth who'd call a hard over to win an argument. If you've been waiting for the moment the hangar finds out who it's been ignoring, it's close now, and it doesn't come the way you think. Subscribe so you don't lose the thread, because what pulls the truth out of that woman isn't a formation, and it isn't a salute. It's a Mayday." Petrosky came out of the planning room fast, but the schedule had already moved, and out over the training area, 8 miles away and 2,000 feet up, an aircraft had already started to shake. She was alone in the way she was always a little alone, even in a full hangar, and because this is the one place the story can go inside her head, it will. 2009, a training area much like this one, an Apache much like 6-2, and Chief Warrant Officer Rene Delgado, 33 years old, call sign already HELLFIRE 1, in the front seat of an aircraft that had just started to talk to her through the pedals. A nibble first. She had noted it and kept flying, the way everyone kept flying, because a nibble is nothing. A nibble is rigging. A nibble is the kind of thing you write up after you land. Then the buzz. And then, with no more warning than that, the number 2 tail rotor servo had gone hard over. Full deflection, jammed, the tail rotor suddenly commanding a thing the pilot had not asked for. And the aircraft had tried to spin, and for a length of time she would never afterward be able to measure. She had fought it, hands and feet, and everything she knew, to talk a machine that wanted to depart controlled flight into staying in the air long enough to reach the ground on her terms. She had landed it. That was the part that mattered, and the part almost no one knew, because a save does not make the news the way a crash does. No one died. The aircraft was reparable. By every official measure, it was a good day, an emergency handled, a crew walking away. But she had climbed out of that cockpit and stood on the skid, and understood, in a way the paperwork would never capture, how close it had been, and how little the fleet actually knew about that failure. How the checklists of the day treated the nibble and the buzz as afterthoughts. How a crew that did not know the sequence could fly a dying servo straight into a hardover they had no reason to expect. The board of inquiry afterward had been brief because there was no wreckage and no casualty to explain, only a servo to examine and a pilot to interview. And she had sat through it and answered plainly and watched the finding land the way findings do. A maintenance-related control failure. Aircraft recovered. No further action. No further action. She had read those 3 words and understood, with a clarity that had never left her, that no further action was exactly how the next crew got killed. The system had done its job. The system was satisfied. And the system had learned nothing. Because a save teaches an institution almost nothing. Only a funeral teaches an institution. And the whole point, the entire desperate point, was to build the lesson before the funeral instead of after it. So she had done the unglamorous thing. She had not made a speech, and she had not let it make her a legend, though the call sign stuck anyway, the way call signs do. She had gone to the engineers with the recorder data and the servo and her own memory of the 4 minutes, and she had made them walk it with her, second by second, until they all understood not just what had failed, but how it had announced itself and been ignored. The nibble, the buzz, the small, honest warnings the aircraft had given that the checklists of the day had no room for. And then she had written the warnings into the procedure. That was the innovation, if a thing so plain could be called that. She had taken the part everyone treated as noise, the nibble and the buzz, and she had made it the first 2 lines, because the aircraft always tells you, and the only question is whether anyone has taught you to listen. She had sat down with the engineers and the test data, and she had written 10 lines. 10 calm lines, in plain hard language, 1 instruction each. What the nibble means, what the buzz means, why you land now, and not after the sortie, and exactly how you hold an aircraft in the sky when the tail rotor has stopped taking orders. Those 10 lines had gone into the fleet publication. They had been drilled into a generation of crews since, into Petrovsky, into Sloan, into every young pilot who could now recite them in their sleep, without ever knowing that the calm on the page was the residue of the worst 4 minutes of one woman's life. That was why she had come a day early and quiet, in gray slacks with a visitor lanyard, not to inspect. An inspection is announced, and an announced hangar is a clean hangar. To see, to stand on an ordinary floor as an ordinary nobody, and find out whether the fleet respected the trend she had bled to teach it, or only the tolerance. And the servo on 6-2 was reading 1.1 and drifting, exactly the way the one that nearly killed her had read, and the master sergeant had signed it up to fly. The Mayday came in over the airfield net at 14 minutes past the hour, and it did not sound like the movies. It sounded like a young man working very hard to keep his voice flat. Mayday, 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 tail rotor control feedback, going to... It's fighting me. I've got feedback in the pedals building toward Hardover, requesting... A gap, filled with the sound of a man flying. It was the launched aircraft, the one that had gone up while 6-2 waited. The pilot was Chief Warrant Officer 2 Wyatt Sloan, 26 years old, and he had exactly the emergency the woman with the lanyard had described on the hangar floor 2 hours before. Feedback, then buzz, then the edge of a hardover, and he was 2,000 feet up with it. The hangar stopped. Every head came up. Out on the tower net, the controllers and the operations duty officer were already moving through the emergency checklist, fast and disciplined, and the checklist for that failure, the one she had written, ran down its 10 lines, and then, near the bottom, hit a referral line that most crews had never had a reason to read aloud, a line that said, in the flat language of official procedure, that the subject matter expert of record for this emergency, call sign HELLFIRE 1, was to be brought onto the net if available. The operations duty officer keyed up, half a question in his voice. Airfield. Ops. Is HELLFIRE 1 on the station? The board says HELLFIRE 1 is inbound this week. And a woman in gray slacks was already crossing the hangar floor to the maintenance radio on the wall, unhurried, laying one flat hand on the desk beside it as she reached for the mic, and she keyed it and spoke in a voice that was so level it changed the temperature of the room. Tower, this is HELLFIRE 1. I'm on the airfield. Put me through to the aircraft. Now. The hangar froze on the name. Master Sergeant Kurt Brumley, standing at the tail of 6-2 with a wrench in his hand, turned around. She did not look at Brumley. She did not look at anyone. She looked at the wall, and she talked to a frightened young man 8 miles away and 2,000 feet up, and she gave him back, one line at a time, the 10 lines she had written 17 years before out of the worst 4 minutes of her life. Wyatt, HELLFIRE 1. I've got you. Listen to my voice and do exactly what I say, in the order I say it. You're going to be on the ground in 4 minutes, and you're going to walk away. First thing, I need you to stop fighting the pedals. I know everything in you wants to fight it. Ease off. Let the aircraft tell you what it's doing. A pause, the length of a breath. Good. Now airspeed. Get me between 70 and 80 knots, and hold it there. The airspeed is doing your tail rotor's job for you. That's why we do it. 70 to 80. Hold it. The whole hangar was silent. 30 people who fixed these aircraft for a living stood and listened to a voice they had spent the morning ignoring talk a spinning ghost out of the sky. Now we're going to bring the power back. Slow, and I mean slow, on my count. Because when you reduce the power, the nose is going to want to swing, and we are going to let it swing and not chase it. You don't chase it. You anticipate it. Ready. Reduce. Now. Easy. Let it come. Hold your heading with a little forward airspeed. That's it. That's exactly it. You're doing it. You're flying it. Talk to me. Say the runway back to me. A voice came back, steadier than it had been. I have the runway. I have the runway. HELLFIRE 1. Then that's where we're going. You're going to make a running landing. Shallow. Like you've done 100 times. And you are not going to try to hover. Because we don't need a hover. We need a runway and some airspeed and the ground. Bring it down the glide slope. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Talk me down the last 100 feet. And she did. And he did. And 8 miles away, the shaking Apache came down the glide slope, with its tail rotor half dead, and its pilot flying every line she gave him. And it touched, and rolled, and slowed, and stopped on the runway, upright, whole, its crew alive. And over the net came a young man's voice cracking on the last word. Down. We're down. Thank you. Thank you, HELLFIRE 1. It was the calm that undid the room, more than the words. The crews had all heard emergency radio calls before. They knew the clipped, fast cadence of people working a problem near the edge. This was not that. This was a woman who had been to the exact place Sloane was and come back, talking him along a path she had walked herself. And there was no fear in her voice, because she had already spent all of that fear 17 years ago and had nothing left but the map. You could hear, in the level of it, that she wasn't hoping the aircraft would make it. She knew the way down. She had written the way down. She was simply reading it to a boy who had not learned yet that the way down existed. She set the microphone back on its hook. She let out one breath, the only sign in the whole thing that it had cost her anything at all. Then she turned around, and she looked at the hangar for the first time since she had keyed the radio. Master Sergeant Kurt Brumley was staring at her, and his face was moving. First, the confusion. A man watching his floor go silent for a name he half knew, casting around for the shape of it. Then the disbelief, as the call sign in the fleet publication he had trained on his whole career refused to fit the woman with the lanyard he had sent to find coffee and a chair. Then the recognition, arriving all at once and from the bottom, the whole morning rearranging itself behind his eyes. The servo she called by its exact number. The failure sequence she recited without a book. The trend she said would cross the line on the next start. All of it collapsing into the plain fact that the tech rep was the author. The tech rep was the voice on the net. The tech rep was HELLFIRE 1. And then the last thing, which was not horror, because Kurt Brumley had committed no crime, only a large and public wrongness. It was understanding. The hard, clean understanding of a proud man learning the exact size of what he had gotten wrong. The wrench slipped out of his hand. It hit the concrete floor and rang once, bright and loud in the silence, and rolled a half circle and lay still. The woman crossed to him, unhurried, and she did not gloat, and she did not soften it into nothing. "Chief Warrant Officer 5 Delgado," she said, level for the floor to hear. "HELLFIRE 1, I wrote the procedure that just brought that aircraft home. And I told you this morning that 6-2 was reading exactly the way that 1 did before it tried to kill its crew." She let it sit 1 beat. "Now, let's go make sure it never gets the chance." What happened next did not happen the way it happens in the stories the crews would tell later, the ones where the villain gets marched away in handcuffs. Kurt Brumley was not a villain, and he was not going anywhere in handcuffs. He had broken no law. He had been arrogant and public about it, and wrong in a way that had almost put an aircraft in the dirt. But arrogant and wrong are not crimes, and Renee Delgado had spent too many years around real consequences to confuse a proud man's bad morning with one. She pulled the servo off 6-2 herself, with Brumley and Kovac beside her, and she cut it open on a bench. And what was inside it was the early stage of a failure mode the fleet had been seeing, quietly, in 1s and 2s, across 3 different units. A bad batch, a manufacturing drift in a seal, a thing that read as a servo running a hair high right up until the morning it did not. 6-2's servo was the clearest example anyone had put hands on. It was, in the plainest terms, the reason to ground and inspect every aircraft in the fleet with that servo lot number, and Delgado, as the incoming brigade standardization officer, was exactly the person who now had to order it. She could have made Brumley the cautionary tale. She had every fact she needed to do it, photographed and time-stamped on her tablet, the confident hand signing with intolerance across a dying part. She did not. Instead, she turned to him at the bench, over the opened servo, and she said the truest thing she had, which was also the most useful. "You're the best set of hands in this building. That's not me being kind. I watched you all morning, and it's just true. And you were the only person on this floor who logged that torque discrepancy on the aft mount at all. Everybody else would have missed it. You didn't. You read it as within tolerance, because for 26 years, within tolerance has never once burned you." She laid a flat hand on the servo between them. "It just did. So now you know what I know, which is that the trend is the truth, and the tolerance is a story we tell ourselves. I need every aircraft with this servo lot pulled and inspected across the brigade, starting today. I'm putting you in charge of it." Brumley looked at her for a long moment, a proud man being handed, instead of a punishment, a job that mattered, and something in his face that had been rigid all morning let go. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And then, quieter, because it cost him, and because he was, underneath the certainty, a good man. "You were right about the trend. I'll teach it that way from now on. That's the part I actually need, she said. Not the inspection. Anyone can turn wrenches. I need the man this floor listens to telling them the trend is the truth. They'll believe it from you in a way they'd never believe it from a publication or a lanyard. She almost smiled. You spent the morning teaching this floor that the tolerance is the answer. Now, spend the next 20 years teaching them it isn't. You'll save more aircraft that way than I ever will with a procedure. It would have been easy and cheaper and more satisfying to the part of her that had stood there being called a lady with a lanyard to break him. She knew exactly how. She had the record. But a broken master sergeant is a floor without its best man, and a floor without its best man is more dangerous, not less. And she had not spent her life keeping aircraft in the sky to make an airfield weaker in order to feel better for an afternoon. The point had never been Kurt Brumley. The point had always been the next Wyatt Sloan, and the one after that. And the way you protect them is not by burning down the people who make honest mistakes, but by turning those people into the ones who catch the mistake next time. That was the whole of it. That was the only thing the 10 lines had ever really been about. If you've made it this far, then you already know this story was never about a wrench hitting the floor. It's about the quiet voice that turns out to be the one thing standing between a young crew and the ground, and about a proud man big enough in the end to pick the wrench back up and do the work right. If that landed for you, subscribe and stay for the last minute. Word of the fleet-wide inspection went out that evening, and over the next days, aircraft came off the line across 3 units and gave up their servos to a bench, and more than one of them was further along than anyone had wanted to believe. Servos reading a hair high, monitored, with intolerance, drifting toward the morning they would not be. Every one of them was a crew that would now not have the 4 minutes Rene Delgado had had. None of those crews would ever know it. That was the nature of the work. The disaster that does not happen leaves no trace and earns no headline. And the people who prevent it do their preventing in cold hangars with a bench and a lot number and a stubborn refusal to accept with intolerance as an answer. She had made her whole career out of the disasters that did not happen, and she had long ago made peace with the fact that no one would ever be able to count them. She made sure specialist Bree Kovach's name went in the record as the one who had backed the reading on the floor when it was expensive to back it, because the young voice that says, "Wait, check that again," is the voice a squadron lives or dies by, and it deserves to be told out loud that it was right. She told Kovach as much herself, quietly, at the bench, that the nerve to contradict the whole weight of a hangar was rarer and more valuable than any set of hands, and that she should guard it and use it, and never let a room full of certain people talk her out of a reading she had made with her own gauge. Kovach would remember that longer than she would remember almost anything else about that year. Late that afternoon, the recovered Apache, Sloan's aircraft, tail rotor half dead, flown down the glide slope on 10 borrowed lines, came home on a flatbed and was towed slowly into the hangar, and the whole floor stopped work to watch it come in, the way a floor does when it knows how close it came. Rene Delgado signed the maintenance log on 6-2 in her plain hand, and where the block asked for the certifying official, she wrote her grade and her name and, out of an old habit she had never broken, her call sign after it, HELLFIRE 1, the same signature that sat, redacted, at the front of the procedure that had just brought a boy home. She capped the pen. She stood a moment in the cold, church-sized quiet of the hangar, with the 2 grounded Apaches, and the 3rd one coming in on its flatbed, and there was no wall of names to visit here, and no message waiting on her phone, and no next mission calling from some far theater. Because that was not what this day had been about. It had been about a hangar that would fly safer tomorrow than it had flown that morning, and about a wrench that had been dropped and picked back up. She found him in the ready room, still in his flight suit, the particular stillness of a man who has not quite finished being afraid. He stood up fast when he saw who it was. She waved him back down and sat across from him and did not say anything heroic, because there was nothing heroic to say. She told him he had flown it well, which was true. She told him the feeling he had right now, the shakiness that arrives after the danger is over, was normal and would pass, and did not mean anything was wrong with him. And she told him the thing the old warrant had once told her, the thing she had carried for 17 years, that the aircraft always tells you, and that his only job for the rest of his career was to keep learning how to listen. Then she sat with him a while longer and let the quiet do the rest, because a young pilot who has just talked his way onto a runway with a dying tail rotor should not spend that night alone with it, and the woman who wrote the 10 lines knew that better than anyone alive. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.